Alright, how are we doing? Steve here. So in the last video I talked you through the main stages of my own Photoshop workflow to give you an overall idea of what it's about. Now in this video what I'm going to do is show you some of the individual techniques that you can use yourself to achieve the outcomes set by each stage of the workflow. So like I mentioned before in the previous video, stage 1 can kind of be skipped over really. There are just some simple standard adjustments that I explained previously, and they don't really require an awful lot of thought. So I'll just move straight on to a more interesting demo, which is evening out the exposure, which comes in stage 2 of the workflow. Now the main goal here is to make sure that all the shadows in our image are bright enough that we can see detail in them, and that none of our highlights are blown out and completely white. So it's sometimes necessary to blend multiple exposures to achieve this, but I'll cover that in the next video, because it probably deserves an entire video just for that one technique really. So for now we'll just assume that the shot was successfully captured in just one frame. So what we're looking at here is pretty much the basic raw file just with those presets from stage 1 applied. And so the first thing I'm going to do is take a look at this this bright area up here. I mean, it's not really blown out, I think I've just about captured this all in one exposure. But I would like to just darken these highlights down a bit. So one way that I can do that is with a levels adjustment, with a curves adjustment layer. And I'll just zoom out so I can see what I'm doing there. And I'll just quite simply just drag this line, move it down, and I'm only really concentrating on this part of the sky here. And so that probably looks about right. And then what I'll do, I'll just zoom back in, and I'm going to start this by inverting the layer mask. So I'm going to press Command I or Control I on the keyboard, and that's going to turn that layer mask black, essentially covering up the effect that's been added from this curves layer. And what that allows me to do now is basically take a white brush. So I've got white selected as my foreground color, I've got the brush tool selected, and I'll go at a reasonably low opacity, around 40% for this. And I'll just really sort of quite roughly start just brushing that in there. And it's quite subtle as I do that. You're not necessarily noticing each stroke as I'm doing it. But when I do the before and after, you'll see it's a better view of really what's going on. So I'll just zoom out. For some reason I always find it easier to do these sort of broad brush strokes on a more sort of zoomed out view. So yeah, I'm just kind of evening it out there, just darkening those clouds down just a little bit. And yeah, so what I'll do now, I'll just toggle this curves layer off and on so we can see the difference that that's made to this shot. And there, just looking at that bright part of the sky mainly, it's just brought that down and made it a little bit more more like the yellow rather than almost kind of blown out white, which is in the before. Now as I toggle this off and on, you'll notice that I've kind of gone over the edges a bit, so to speak. The brush strokes have kind of encroached on the rock area there. So what I'll do is just with a smaller brush, just go back to a black foreground color for the brush and just kind of carefully just sort of stroke along the horizon there to make sure that none of this foreground and midground has been affected by this curves layer. And yeah, that's probably close enough. Right, so that's it for the highlights. Now, what I also need to do is kind of the opposite with the shadows and brighten them up and bring out any detail that's kind of lost in the darkest parts of the image at the moment. The way I'm going to do that with this shot, I'm going to pick this time a levels adjustment layer, and I'm just going to take the midpoint slider and move it to the left, just nudge it to the left a little bit. And I mean, if I go like to an extreme, you can kind of see here, unfortunately, in this shot, I haven't quite managed to capture all the detail in those shadows, so some of these areas are probably a bit too dark to actually recover. But I'll do my best to bring out as much detail as I can. So just bringing that back to normal, and probably about there is all right. I'm wondering if I can just move this this highlight slider up as well. Let me just see. Okay, so that kind of brings the shadows out, but also it affects the entire rest of the image as well. So again, I'll just click on the adjustment layer, click Command-I on the keyboard to invert the mask, and this time I'm going to kind of do a few like long broad brush strokes along the sort of main shadow areas, but then I'll zoom in and get those really darkest sort of parts after that to to really brighten those areas up. So just not being too careful here. I think I can get away with it because this foreground is like so rocky and jagged. You're not necessarily noticing if I go over the edges a little bit, but depending on how depending on what the foreground looks like or what your image looks like, you may need to take a bit more care with your brush strokes here. But I'm just going to do it quite quickly, and just going to brush around the darkest sort of areas. So this part of the foreground down here, I'm just going to brighten that up just a touch. And this is quite a sort of shadowy ridge around there. Just zoom in, probably zoom in over there to get those bits with a smaller brush. Again, this isn't as accurate as I would prefer, but I don't want to spend all day boring you zooming in and being really careful with this for the demonstration. So I'll just do a quick rough kind of job here, but hopefully you can see what I'm getting at. So once I've done the bigger sort of areas, what I'll do is just zoom in, try and pick up on like the sort of darkest little crevices. Oops, I'll undo that brush stroke. Okay. So yeah, like I said before, there are some areas where it's kind of almost gone to black in the raw file. So no matter what I do, I'm never going to be able to recover these shadows 100%. But if I just toggle this before and after now, you'll kind of see the overall effect that it's had. So that's the before, and that's the after. It just kind of lifting those shadow areas, and it gives us a bit more detail in there. And really that's it for this stage. It kind of it looks a bit flat, and the contrast is pretty poor, but what I find is that it gives a really good starting point to then go ahead and start adding the contrast that I want where I want it. Yep, so just quickly to recap, that's one way that you can use curves and level adjustment to achieve the results that you want to get from stage 2 of the workflow, which is evening out the exposure. Right, now stage 3 is all about getting the desired color balance across the image before we start doing any real editing. And one simple way to do this is just using the eyedropper tool in the curves adjustment layer. But the problem that I'm going to have using that simple technique with this image is that there's such a strong color cast given by the sun that there isn't really a correct color balance, because the whites aren't really supposed to be white because they've got this golden light shining on them. So what I'm going to do, rather than use the eyedropper tool to sort of pick my white and grey points, I'm still going to use a curves adjustment layer. But what I'm going to do instead, just one click to zoom out a bit, what I'm going to do is just run through each of the red, green and blue channels and adjust the black point and the white point for each individual channel. So with the curves adjustment panel open, I'm going to select the red channel first, and what I need to do is click the Alt or Option key on the keyboard and hold that. And while I'm holding that, I'm going to grab this point, this slider at the end of the curve, and I'm just going to sort of pull it inwards And as I do that, what you'll notice is that this big red blob kind of comes into the picture. So the way to know how much to slide this is to basically move it until you see that very first pixel start to appear. And if you can sort of go one click backwards from that, then that's great. So the idea is to get as close to that blown out pixel as possible without actually having it appear. So that looks about right there. So I'll let go of the mouse, and still with the Alt or Option key selected, I'll do the same thing for the black point. And this time I'm going to see some black pixels appear just down in the bottom area there, you'll notice. So I'm just going to back that off, and basically do the same thing for the green and blue channels. So I'll select the green channel, hold Alt or Option on the keyboard and slide this end point here down a bit. So I've got that first pixel, and then I'll just pull it back a smidge. And same for the black point. And then finally on the blue channel here, do the same, hold the keyboard, slide it down and get that first pixel, move it back. And then the black point, same thing. And there we go. I'll just give a quick before and after. So this is the before and this is the after. And it's a subtle change, but in theory this should be the correct starting point for the image. Okay, so the next stage in the workflow talks about contrast, drama, colors and all that kind of stuff. And that's where you can really start to sort of get creative and add the the wow factor into your shots. And one of my favorite ways of doing this is with a levels adjustment layer. And so I'll just add one now. And just to give you a kind of idea of the way that I like to use this is, after I've added the levels adjustment, I'll just take this midpoint slider and sort of shift it up a bit. Take the white point or highlight slider and slide it down. And as you can see there, like just looking at this foreground area especially, that's really kind of starting to bring it out, and it looks really quite nice. So I'll just kind of use this simple technique, and when it looks good in a particular area of the image, I'll just invert the layer mask, and then quite simply just brush that effect back into that part of the shot. So with a bigger brush here, I've got a white foreground selected. I'll stick with 40% opacity and just sort of subtly brush that effect in there. And again, it is subtle, so you might not notice the difference as I'm doing the brush strokes, but there's the before and there's the after. So before and after. And maybe I can use a touch of it just along here. Again, before and after. And this, like I said, this is sort of one of my favorite techniques really. So I'll just go ahead and just keep doing this on sort of individual parts of the image, just looking at, say for example, this water with this particular adjustment actually makes the water look quite good. So just see how bright I can make it there. Again, just pulling these two sliders here on the levels adjustment towards each other. And again, just invert the layer mask, and with a white brush, just subtly brush this back in, or brush the effect into this area where I want it to be applied. And there you go, there's the before and the after. So it's a really powerful technique, and really simple, but it gives such a good natural effect that it's one of the techniques that I use in pretty much all of my shots actually. Now for this sky here, I might want to sort of bring these clouds down a bit in brightness, and actually the curves, I prefer the curves adjustment for this type of darkening effect. So I'll just add that and then pull that down, pull that line down there to darken the whole image. Again, just invert the layer mask and just brush it into this sky here. And yeah, there we go. So it's looking pretty good already. I mean, I probably would, if I was developing this shot again for for keeps, then I would continue on and do a lot more of these subtle adjustments. But yeah, I think it's got to the point where you can kind of see where I'm going with these adjustment layers, and and how I use them to get that contrast and drama and deepen those colors. Yeah, so the next stage is the embellishment stage, and so what I'm going to show you here is how I use the dodge and burn tools to really bring out the detail and help focus our attention on the bits of the image that I want your eye to be drawn to. So what I'm going to do is basically use the dodge and burn tools to sort of highlight this big sort of foreground rock here, and the water here, that's quite a sort of nice leading line through the shot. Again, with it kind of creates a bit of a triangle here, so your eye goes up there, and then you've got that angle coming in from both sides of the shot. So what I'll do first is just duplicate this background layer so that I can do the dodging and burning on a copy of that layer without actually damaging any of the original background image. So if I mess something up, I can just remove that layer and start again. Okay, so I'll start off with the dodge tool, which is of course here. And usually I would work on a really quite a low exposure, sort of no more than 5 normally, but for this demo I'll kind of just exaggerate the effect because it is a subtle effect, and the video compression when you upload to YouTube sort of means that you might not see the detail of what I'm doing. So yeah, I'll just exaggerate the effect for this demo, and I'll keep it on the midtones. What this means, this drop down here, is the dodge tool is going to brighten whatever I brush into, but it's going to either depend on what I've selected here, so I can either brighten the shadows, the midtones, or the highlights. So I'll just do the midtones for now, and just with a big brush I'll zoom out again and just kind of brush onto this area here, and as I do the before and after, you can see that's kind of made it a lot brighter, and kind of it sort of stands out and shines a bit more. And I'll also do a similar thing just in this water here, and that's brightening it up nicely. Again, not being too accurate for the demo, but you get the idea. And I might also just sort of brighten up this this line here in this rock. Okay, so the before and after, if you can see that, then this is the before, and this is the after, just with that dodge happening there and brightening up and sort of really drawing the attention to those areas. But to bring even more attention to those areas, as well as brightening them up, what I can do is darken the surrounding bits and pieces. So to do that, I'll just grab the burn tool, and again with the midtones, exposure 10%, again higher than I would normally use. But then I'll just use that to start brushing down here and subtly darkening this piece of rock in the foreground. I'll kind of go up here as well, just darken this down a touch. And then just the top of this this rock shelf as well. And if we see there, that's the before and after. That's the before, and that's the after. I think I might have gone a bit overboard on the top of this rock shelf here. That's kind of gone a bit of a weird colour, but yeah, like I said, I would normally be using a more subtle exposure percentage. And so that's one of the ways I would use the dodge and burn to really sort of embellish various parts of the image, or individual parts that I want to kind of make stand out. And so yeah, it's just occurred to me, there's one thing that I haven't really sort of talked about much before, and that is the idea of when you process an image, I find it really helpful to actually, once I've finished it, I'll go away, leave it for at least a few hours, and then come back and have another look and see if it all still looks good, and if I still like it, if I still like what I've done to it. And yeah, I've kind of had a little mini version of that just happen to me now. So just coming to the end of this workflow. I mean, we haven't done stage 6, which is sharpening and saving, but that's pretty basic stuff. So I'll skip over that for now. But yeah, just sort of as I've come to the end of this, it occurs to me that this image probably still looks a bit bright. So what I'm going to do, I'll just throw in another technique just real quick to show you one way that I sometimes use to kind of darken the image and make it look a bit more kind of moody and dramatic. And it's quite simple. Basically, you can just add either a curves or levels adjustment layer, and without making any actual changes to it, just change the blend mode from normal to multiply, and then just take the opacity and drag it sort of quite a way down, and just sort of play around with this slider until it sort of reaches a point where you think it looks pretty good. So I don't know, that's the before, that's the after. I think I probably prefer the darker version. So anyway, you can you can take that and use it and try it out on some images if you want. Okay, so that's just a handful of techniques that you can use to implement some of the individual stages of the workflow. Obviously, it would be pretty much impossible for me to show you every single possible technique that you can use just in one video. But if you like these techniques and you think that you can use them, and you'd like to see more, then I just want to let you know that I have just released a whole new bunch of videos into the Essentials membership area of the Post-Processing Mastery website. So if you want to find out more about what's included in there now, you can just click the link. I'll put a link below this video, and you can go and check that out. The membership at the moment is still just $17. So now, on top of the existing essential videos, which include establishing a workflow, and so there's a couple of complete end-to-end workflow demos there, some tips on composition, and these two videos 4 and 5, talk about fine-tuning and some of the ways that you can really make your images stand out. Video 6 has got some great stuff about layer masks, and video 7 is another video which is a complete full end-to-end workflow demonstration. And depending on whether you have picked up my emails about the creating landscapes with impact, you may or may not have come across these videos already, but I've just put them into the membership area anyway. Again, just those 3 videos by themselves is a full 1 hour workflow walkthrough. But the new section that I've just added is this 5-minute quick vids section here, which gives you 12 short but sweet video tutorials to really give you some of these extra techniques and methods that you can fit into your workflow. So there's a couple of techniques here on how to brighten the darkest shadows, and there's one how to boost blur clouds, basically adding some extra contrast and drama to your clouds. There's some videos on different ways of desaturation. There's a couple of videos. These are really cool actually. They give you a quick workflow that basically I've called the 5-minute workflow, but what these videos are, they just show you what I would do if I only had 5 minutes to work on a photo. How would I develop it, and what would I fit into the workflow, what would I leave out. So like if you're sort of finding yourself rushed for time, then these 2 videos are great. Oh, plus you also get these new how-to vids which I've just added. So there's a couple here, how to use a fake grad filter and how to fix blown highlights. That's a really cool video actually, that can really save you if you've taken a shot and you haven't taken multiple exposures and your sky has blown out, if you've been shooting sort of into the sun or something. This video will sort you out there. So the Essentials membership now contains these 3 sections. You've got the original Essentials videos, you've got the how-to videos, and these 5-minute quick vids. And you'll find those all still for just $17. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and these techniques that I've shown you are really powerful, really useful, and so at the very least I'd really like you to just go and try these things that I've shown you in this video, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks very much for watching.